It's been roughly 7 years since the last season and 10 years since the first. But Daredevil is finally back, and not as some cheap cameo in some other show that destroys his character. No, he is back in his own series that will pick up right where the last one left off. Kinda. And the whole thing will be pretty underwhelming, unfortunately. Don't get me wrong, it is certainly leagues better than most of the other MCU shows, but it still doesn't hold a candle to the excellent Daredevil seasons that came before it. Born Again sits roughly around the average between the two, so let's get into it and find out why. For starters, if you haven't seen the prior Daredevil MCU appearances, you will likely be very lost, as the show doesn't do much to remind audiences of what came before, and that makes things a bit frustrating, because they make certain past events critical, while other past events are swept under the rug, and it's hard to tell which events are really meant to matter. Last we saw him, Daredevil was facing off again with his classic rival Wilson Fisk, whom in their last outing, hired Bullseye to pose as Daredevil to tarnish his name in the public eye. However, Bullseye and Fisk had a falling out, which leads to a three-way battle that left Bullseye getting paralyzed and Fisk getting arrested, with these two making a deal that Daredevil would not go after Vanessa if Fisk did not go after Foggy and Karen. Then Matt Murdoch and his friends celebrate by adding Karen Page's name to the group business, and they all lived happily ever after, until of course when Daredevil and Fisk make several unflattering minor appearances in other Disney Plus shows.
How did you just do that? I'm a really good lawyer.
That leads into Born Again, where we see the classic trio of Matt, Karen, and Foggy walking out of their new building as they go to their classic bar to have some drinks. Matt and Karen develop a budding romance, while making jokes at Foggy's failed attempts to flirt.
He does not have the game for Kirsten Duffy.
Oh boy.
What?
No. He's calling the firm NM&P.
No. Foggy.
But this is slander because the Foggy of old never had such problems, and the Karen of old thought much more highly of him.
You dated that?
Yep, let's step a little faster. Is this a date?
I sort of think it is.
We also get glimpses at new characters throughout the bar, whom will be making their debuts this season, but more on them later because trouble is afoot, as Matt hears that there's danger in the distance. So he transforms into Daredevil and runs off to save the day, and oh boy, this CGI is brutal. This is Daredevil's first appearance, so if the effects are this bad already, that is a big red flag. Though as we will later learn, this will not be a very effects-heavy season. Suddenly, tragedy strikes, as Daredevil realizes he's been tricked, and the real danger has been focused on Foggy Nelson, as Bullseye returns to snipe him. Then Karen watches over Foggy, as Daredevil and Bullseye have a grueling, yet slightly goofy battle. Ma'am, what are you looking at? And why are you just standing there? Take evasive action, you lifeless NPC. This seems to be Born Again's attempt at the iconic Wonder scene, which has been a beloved staple of the past seasons, in which Daredevil would have prolonged fights that were oriented to look like they were all one take. Born Again does an okay job, but this pales in comparison to what came before, as the CGI once again is very bad, and also overused. Civilians get involved and it comes off as silly looking. The choreography is also lackluster, as their attempts to make these two seem tired involves them just awkwardly walking around and ignoring danger once in a while. The choreography is also made at the expense of character consistency. As we see here, Daredevil blasts Bullseye through some doors into civilians, knocking this guy out and endangering everyone in the room, while doing a terrible job at saving them. The Daredevil of old would absolutely not throw his arch enemy headfirst into a random innocent dude trying to hide, whom Daredevil would absolutely know was hiding there, because he is Daredevil. The old Wonders worked better because Daredevil used spare moments of downtime to rest, but would jump right back into action whenever danger returned. Any CGI was used very sparingly, and there weren't any goofy moments like this. It doesn't help that Bullseye's costume is incredibly lame. Cosplayers could do better. Also, Bullseye was last seen getting paralyzed by the Kingpin, and undergoing a bizarre experimental spinal surgery. I guess we can just assume he got better, and is now as healthy as ever. It's odd that they would add paralysis to his story if they weren't going to do anything with it, but whatever. Daredevil's costume is also just okay. It's pretty similar to what was used in the past, but even then, his costume was always one of the weaker parts of the show. The armor just doesn't really seem to fit his aesthetic. It would have been much nicer if they used the black costume as a template to build off of. A lighter, more clothy design would suit his character more, and I get that the armor has a reason for being there within the context of the show, but Kingpin wears the same type of armor, and his just looks like a normal suit, so there's no excuse. Anyhow, Foggy Nelson bleeds out and dies. No, that's wrong. But let's finish the scene before we talk about it. Upon noticing Foggy's death, Daredevil throws Bullseye off the rooftop while having no concern for his life, which is a wild leap in character development for the opening scene, especially given how Season 3 ended.
Kill me! No! God knows I want you, but you don't get to destroy who I am!
Though Bullseye miraculously survives, Daredevil then takes off his helmet while in full view of this other guy named Cherry, who seems to be a Disney Plus original character, not found in the comics. Get used to me saying that. We then cut to the opening credits, which is nice to see again, as Marvel usually skips these nowadays, but then we return in a 1 year later time skip, where Matt has left Hell's Kitchen in favor of a much flashier New York City apartment. He broke up with Karen, and she is no longer involved in the story. He got a new job with a lawyer that Foggy was flirting with earlier, and we learn that Matt has completely given up on being Daredevil, and Kingpin has completely given up on crime, as he now desires to become a legitimate mayor instead. So here's where we have to pause and talk a bit. Firstly, I respect the boldness required to open the show in such an insane way, but on the other hand, what the hell are they doing? What the writers did here was essentially make an in-universe reboot, in the sense that all the prior seasons and appearances of Daredevil no longer matter. All those long hours of great character development for Foggy and Karen are just thrown out the window.
I'd consider it a fourth season.
Okay.
It's a new path. We kind of blow it up, the past, but it's there, and it's connected.
We kind of blow it up, the past, but it's there. And it's connected.
That's not to say that these characters should never be allowed to die, but this doesn't service the story in a satisfying way. It just crashes the previous story to a complete halt in favor of bringing in a new one. But of course, this is a comic book story, so there's always a chance that either of them could always come back. But as far as this season goes, that will mostly not be the case, and that is disappointing. Stepping away from Hell's Kitchen is also rather bizarre, given how important that area was made to seem in the past. That would be like if George Washington spent all his time fighting in the Revolutionary War, just to give it all up and move to Canada. And speaking of giving up, the whole retiring Daredevil thing has already been done before at the start of Season 3, and it got resolved within the first 2 episodes.
I don't get to choose who I am. I'm Daredevil.
He also gave it up very briefly in The Defenders, before very quickly returning to the role.
Do you miss it? The suit, the mask?
No. Feels like a chapter of my life that's closed.
So seeing him give it up yet again not only seems contrary to what came before, but it's also executed in a much less satisfying way than in Season 3, being much slower paced and less eventful, as, spoiler alert, Daredevil will not appear in the Daredevil show for the majority of the remaining episodes. Yay. All this to say that this show's opener is a rough one with a lot of red flags, and this is only the first 15 minutes. Though for better or for worse, the tone and pacing for the remainder of this season are nowhere near as wild as this opener. After the title screen, we watch Matt and Fisk get ready for their days. Then we see Fisk's wife Vanessa host a meeting with the apparent 5 crime families of NYC, making this quite a jump for Vanessa's character, as she was previously just a normal art collector who happened to fall in love with a crime boss, and was only learning about bits and pieces of his work over the course of 3 seasons. But now she's apparently so good at being a crime boss herself, to the point where they don't even need Kingpin around anymore. Speaking of, if you're like most people, you probably haven't seen what Kingpin has been up to outside of his Daredevil appearances, which is unfortunately pretty important stuff to know in order to understand this story going forwards. So if you weren't aware, Kingpin formed an estranged mentorship with Echo, everyone's favorite Marvel character, and he cried and pleaded for his life as she shot him in the head, only he miraculously survived and decided to hang out with her for a while before finally going home to New York again. The full story is more complicated than that, but let's be honest, no one cares about the Echo show. We can discuss it in a later video, but the reason why it has to be brought up here is because the exodus Fisk went on made him a changed man, and he no longer cares about being a crime boss, so he undoes all the work that Vanessa had going on, and now he insists on running for mayor, while only using clean, crime-free money to do it. Don't know how he gets all this clean, crime-free money, but whatever. It is also established here that Wilson and Vanessa have grown distant and their relationship is strained. Later we get highlights of the BB report. BB is the niece of the late reporter Ben Urich from season 1. BB is stepping into her uncle's shoes as a reporter in her own right, and the show will often use the street interviews that she conducts as a way of transitioning from one scene to the next. Initially this seemed like a nice way to give the civilian perspective on the show's events, but after 9 episodes of this, these interviews come off as boring filler that more often than not only serve to take you out of the story and waste time.
And I'm sick and tired of being afraid.
Later, we get introduced to Matt's new law partner, Kirsten, who will serve as Foggy's replacement. She is a minor character from the comics, and a relatively modern one at that, who got an updated look and role in this show, though she is still largely a minor character, so there won't be much else to say about her. Her scenes mainly involve her criticizing Matt for his strange behavior. We then see Bullseye get his prison sentence, and I have to say, this guy looks great for someone who was paralyzed and thrown off a rooftop. Reminder, he doesn't have superpowers, he can just throw things really well. Anyhow, he gets a life sentence, and afterwards, Matt and Karen have a brief argument about their strained relationship, before Karen leaves the show indefinitely.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
We waited 7 years just for this to happen. Meanwhile, we get an inside look at Fisk's election campaign, and off the bat, this show oddly treats being mayor like being president. And I'm sorry, but I don't know anyone who cares this much about a mayor, outside of Knox County, Tennessee. Maybe NYC is different from most cities, but seeing this much hoopla over a mayor from both the outside and inside perspectives just seems a bit silly. The public perception of Fisk is also rather odd, as at one point he was so hated by the people that he couldn't safely leave his home, to now being universally beloved in his election campaign. This isn't necessarily a fault of this season alone, but it is a wild shift. But anyhow, let's meet the cabinet. First, we have Sheila. Her role is to tell Fisk that everything he's doing is always wrong.
You can't just decide something and then speak it into existence.
Respectfully, Mr. Mayor, this is the job.
Sir, I'd advise against whatever you do. Stop it.
It's your job.
She is pretty annoying and wastes a lot of screen time. The presumed intention with her character is to explain what normal politicians would do in any given scenario, to show how outside the box and unorthodox Fisk is, with his new way of doing things. It's a neat idea, but it ultimately just hinders the story because she has to constantly undermine everything he says, and is always treating him like an idiot while he does nothing about her backtalk. Then we have Daniel Blake. He is also annoying. He is here to represent the youth perspective, and despite the fact that he's an incompetent screw-up, Fisk seems to always want him around.
I don't deserve to.
Daniel, just shut up.
Are you trying to argue yourself out of a job?
Neither of these two have anything to do with the comics, by the way. That should be pretty obvious given how similar his name is to Donald Blake, the alter ego of Thor. Ideally, you wouldn't want names so similar, but you'd have to read a comic to know that exists. Then there's Buck Cashman, who is a reference to a comic character, but in name only, and basically serves as Kingpin's equivalent to Random Task. When we rejoin Matt, we find that he has been set up by his partner Kirsten to go on a blind date with a woman named Heather Glenn. Heather Glenn is a classic Daredevil love interest, though like Buck Cashman, the Heather in the show will only really represent her comic book character in name only, aside from the fact that she's dating Matt Murdoch. And this date goes so well, in fact, that these two end up moving in together in no time at all. More on that later. The show also takes a deeper dive on Matt's relationship with this new character, Cherry. In being a Disney Plus original character, Cherry services the story as Matt's private investigator, meaning he will do odd jobs throughout the show in order to give Matt information, given that he has retired as Daredevil. They ponder the motives of Wilson Fisk, and worry about what he might want to do with his power as mayor. So Matt decides to confront him directly, which leads them to a chat in a diner. They ultimately agree to respect the changes that each other have made in their lives, and agree to only interfere with each other again if they show signs of their old selves, with these new life goals being the theme of the show, given that they are born again as newly reformed men. And it is worth noting here that the dialogue is actually pretty good, as it is throughout most of the show. The characters are sincere, showing real emotions and motivations. The atrocious, infamous MCU humor doesn't plague every 2 minutes of the show's screen time, like it does in most shows nowadays. Well, except for a few moments, but we'll address that in a bit. The first episode closes out with Fisk winning his election, while contrasting how his love life is struggling while Matt Murdoch's is thriving. In the next episode, we see a man witness a beatdown in the subway and he attempts to break it up. However, one of the assailants trips and falls into the oncoming train, dying instantly. The other reveals himself to be an undercover cop and arrests the would-be hero, while the victim of the beatdown runs away. This is Hector Ayala, and his upcoming trial will be the focus of the next few episodes, as Matt overhears his unfair treatment from the police. So he decides to represent Hector, since even though this guy tripped into this train, Hector is being charged for murder, but Matt can tell that Hector is innocent thanks to his lie detecting abilities. The Hector Ayala case seems to be an uphill battle, as it is being framed as a cop versus anti-cop agenda. Meanwhile, the Kingpin is doing nothing noteworthy, as he has long-winded conversations in his office and orders some construction workers to fix a road more quickly, and some long-winded scenes that merely say he's doing a decent job as mayor so far. Side note, Vincent D'Onofrio is pretty great as Kingpin, but seeing him use his supervillain voice while doing just random, mundane mayor tasks is pretty funny.
I want an all-hands meeting, now! Where am I?
We later get a more formal introduction to the character BB, as she is getting a sit-down interview with Wilson Fisk, thanks to the help of Daniel Blake. These two have an odd relationship, as they appear to be close friends, yet throughout the show they will consistently backstab and insult each other, and will deliberately use each other to advance their own careers. All in all, they both come off as fairly unlikable and annoying, especially since their side story has very little impact on the overall plot. BB brings an issue to Kingpin's attention, in that the police commissioner Gallo is not supportive to him, and if he resigns from his position, then the NYPD as a whole will not be supportive of Fisk at all. Therefore, instead of reforming the police to his liking, Fisk will blackmail Gallo into sticking around until he's ready to kill him later on. And this is just odd because it seems backwards. Like, why would Fisk want someone around who will clearly work against him? Even if he lost police support, it would seem like a necessary loss because he has the resources to rebuild them in his own way. It seems like it should be the case that he would want to blackmail Gallo into leaving, with Gallo refusing because he knows he can do the most damage to Fisk by maintaining his position and operating on the inside, thus forcing Fisk to get rid of him in a more brutal fashion. By the way, BB and Gallo are even more of the mini Disney Plus original characters, and the amount of these people is getting incredibly obnoxious, because I was promised a Daredevil show, and this story so far has very little to do with that. Yes, the old series had TV originals as well, but those characters were welcome additions because they had wild, exciting storylines, and they were in the minority, as the rest of the cast was still made up of spot-on comic book representations. As a matter of fact, Season 3 already did a fairly decent portrayal of the Born-Again comic, while the actual Born-Again season has hardly any comic precedence whatsoever, outside of the surface-level plot point of Fisk being the mayor, which is a relatively modern storyline, by the way, because of course it is, and it has nothing to do with the Born-Again series. But this show will barely resemble that new comic anyway, because they removed and altered the comic characters in favor of introducing a bunch of boring nobodies that have nothing profound to say or do. Speaking of, it's Cherry's turn to have the screen again, as he does some investigating to Hector's background, and by investigating, I mean he peeks around Hector's bedroom a little bit to discover that he is actually a vigilante known as White Tiger, and that's a very mundane way to deliver a major reveal like this. On the rare occasion that Daredevil's identity would be revealed, it was always treated as a major event that would often be a result of major developments in the story through either Matt's own failures, the cunningness of his enemies, or the strengthening of his relationships, and there's always a long trail of story beats that lead up to these moments that make them feel either incredibly satisfying or terrifying.
Tell me, so at what point did you learn about Mr. Murdoch's secret life? Yeah. Thank you.
But the way Cherry makes this discovery in this scene is so underwhelming and easy that it would have been equally satisfying if Hector just straight up told Matt who he was. At least then we could have saved some screen time for something more exciting. When Matt learns about the White Tiger, he lectures Hector for lying and for living this dangerous lifestyle in an ironic sort of scene. Later he persuades the judge to not use Hector's vigilante antics as evidence during this trial. In fearing that Matt's history may affect his judgment during this trial, Cherry gives Matt a pep talk about how much better his life is without Daredevil, and a conversation like this would have more depth if it came from someone like Foggy, but we just met Cherry, so who cares what he thinks? Now, if it seems like I'm moving through each of these scenes rather quickly, that's because there simply isn't that much to say about them. Most of them carry on for about 5 to 7 minutes at a time, but it's mostly shots of artsy city life, alongside slow, meandering conversations that burn through lots of screen time just to give small tidbits of information. That leads us into this next scene, where the show does something that the comics are also quite guilty of, that I have personally always hated, in that they give the side characters all kinds of random social connections, so that they all conveniently know each other. In this case, they establish that Matt's new girlfriend Heather, whom is also a therapist, will be taking on the show's next side villain as a client, as well as Wilson Fisk himself, as he and Vanessa are now undergoing marriage counseling. Doing stuff like this is frustrating because it makes the world seem very small, as if Heather is the only therapist in New York, and now she knows everybody because they all come to her with their issues. Again, the comics are also guilty of this, but it would just be nice if the world building wasn't so limiting in this way. However, the more pressing issue at hand is the content of this scene as well, as earlier on, it was revealed that Vanessa cheated on Wilson, and in this counseling, he is made to sit there while she tells everyone how great her new lover was, while passing the blame of the affair onto Wilson himself, because he made her lonely.
I was lonely.
while he was recovering from his bullet wound to the head. That sucks. Vanessa was last established as being the ultimate ride or die for Wilson, but now they've made her for the streets.
I knew being with you would be complicated. I made that choice. Find who did this to us and make them understand. They could never take you away from me. Don't you understand? We're all broken. The point is to find the person whose broken pieces fit with yours.
Tell me about Adam. What you were feeling. Why him?
His hands drew beautiful sketches. I mean, just...
Can we not?
Though neither of these character portrayals actually resemble her comic self, as in those, she was someone who never approved of Kingpin's criminal life, and he always had to find ways to hide it from her. So Vanessa as a character is just all over the place, and the fact that they make her out to be the victim, while Kingpin just sits there and apologizes for not understanding her, instead of Hulk smashing the entire room, is pathetic. This sucks. Their relationship used to be fascinating, but now both of them have been butchered as characters. The episode ends with Matt tracking down the victim of the subway beatdown, whom Hector was trying to save. He gets there only moments before some corrupt cops do, so he lets the man escape. Then he confronts the cops as Matt Murdoch, and ends up exposing his abilities to them when a fight breaks out. He doesn't hide his face or anything, as I guess his secret identity just isn't that big of a deal to him anymore. I know they want to save the costume for the big return later in the season, but this is stupid. Show Daredevil in the Daredevil show. For all of season 3's faults, it's still got that part right. Side tangent. This is yet another reason to dislike the armored costume. Aside from it just not quite looking right, it's heavy, inconvenient, and too difficult to change into on a moment's notice, which is counterproductive to what this character needs. They had the right idea with the black costume, and they would only need to tweak it a little bit in order to make it something more comic accurate. It seemed like the show was going in that direction with the costume, given how season 3 ended, but then, She-Hulk. In short, cloth costume good, armor costume bad, and that goes for most of these heroes. Anyway, this fight is so brutal that it's actually unclear if Matt killed these cops or not, until we're able to see them again in the following episode. Don't get me wrong, it's nice to see brutality return to a Marvel show, but my goodness, it's hard to tell if he cares about that no-kill rule at all at this point. The next episode starts with 2 minutes of Hector describing a beach he likes, in order to make him seem more relatable. We then see a truck robbery that escalates into murder. We'll touch on that a bit more later. Then Vanessa and Wilson argue some more. Then Matt and this corrupt cop he nearly killed earlier encounter each other again, and have a mutual agreement to not expose each other's secrets. That seems like a fine way to keep his identity secret on the surface, but then what will happen when the trial is over? This random, untrustworthy dude now just has this information at all times, tucked away in his back pocket. Well, whatever. Later the trial starts, and things aren't going well, because a bunch of lies are being spread to make Hector look bad, and Matt decides it's a good time to insult the witness in front of the entire court.
There's this thing they say in boxing, the best cure for a black eye is fast hands.
Objection. Sustained. Come on, Mr. Murdoch.
Now, while this is all going on, there's a side plot showing that Cherry has to hide and escort the victim of the beatdown because he will be a key witness in this trial, as the opposition has claimed that he was not present during this subway beatdown, with the narrative being that Hector gave an unprovoked attack to these cops. So they spend all this time showing where this guy is hidden, and showing this big wacky chase scene, while also running late to the trial, forcing Matt to have to buy time. Then they have this big switcheroo moment where the bad guys chase the wrong car, and then finally the guy shows up. But all of a sudden, he seems too scared to tell the truth. So he lies and confirms the opposition narrative. We are given no proper explanation for why he did this, but now this witness is no longer a part of the show, and this subplot is dead, meaning this whole goofy adventure and this earlier brawl were pretty much all just wasteful filler. Isn't that fun? So now, since the key witness is no longer viable, Matt resorts to goofball tactics and exposes Hector's identity as White Tiger to the entire court, without permission from either Hector himself, nor the judge who previously agreed that the secret identity wouldn't be admissible evidence in the trial. Now, I'm no lawyer, but I'm pretty sure a stunt like that is a big no-no that would likely lead to a mistrial, if not tank Matt's entire career. But of course, neither of those things happen. In fact, there are no consequences for this whatsoever, aside from a stern talking to.
You blew open this door, Mr. Murdoch, which means...
Yeah, it's open season on my client. I get it.
Well, that's it.
Hector himself is mildly miffed, but he doesn't do anything about it, and I can't imagine the jury being too swayed by this, because the reveal stirs a big uproar in the courtroom, including Matt's partner Kirsten begging him not to do it.
You're a hero.
Matt, don't do this.
Mr. Ayala, yes or no? Are you the vigilante known as the White Tiger?
The reason Matt does this is because his last desperate argument is to use Hector's actions as the White Tiger in order to suggest that such a heroic guy could never do something so heinous. Then he brings in a bunch of random civilians who were saved in the past by the White Tiger to prove that he is a good hero. Why does he do this without telling anyone, especially Hector or his team? Well, because he's just a dick, I guess. The way White Tiger is both praised as a hero and denounced as a vigilante is meant to be a reflection on Matt's inner struggle with retiring as Daredevil. So at least there's a method to this madness, and this isn't just random stuff happening on screen like some other shows. However, this argument is weak as hell. It has nothing to do with the facts of the trial, and this is taking place in a world where Tony Stark created Ultron and Captain America spent time as a known fugitive. So just the mere fact of being a superhero shouldn't mean crap, especially being one as unknown as White Tiger. Not to mention there are countless examples of previously crime-free civilians who just snap one day and commit heinous crimes, or who turn out to be serial killers all along. Having a clean record beforehand proves nothing, and should be an extremely easy argument to counter. If I was on the jury, the entire defense would seem laughably incompetent and embarrassing when compared to the seemingly solid case the prosecution has. But sure enough, the jury sides in favor of not guilty, and Hector can go free. The episode ends with Hector suiting up as White Tiger, as he just kinda struts around on the streets, until a guy walks up to him and shoots him in the head.
What the
Bro, what are you doing? Pay attention. No wonder no one's heard of you. You're the worst superhero ever. Even Frogman did a better job.
I actually read the opposite.
White Tiger is a classic comic hero, by the way, so I'm sure all 4 of his fans are going to be really upset about this. All he did as White Tiger was walk around and get shot. Awesome stuff. The random old lady who died in season 1 had a way more tragic and impactful death than this. And now this hours-long trial storyline was all for nothing. This show just loves to waste time and go nowhere. Mind you, we are in episode 3, so we are past the runtime of an average feature-length film, and we don't have much of anything to show for it. In the next one, we see the niece of Hector stepping up to try and find her uncle's killer. Her personality revolves around talking shit to Matt Murdoch's face, while he stands there like a plank.
You got him out of jail? A lot of good that did him, huh?
Presumably, she will take on her uncle's place as the new White Tiger, who most of you might remember from the Ultimate Spider-Man series. However, given this show's snail's pacing, this plot point likely won't find any resolution for another 5 seasons. This niece is very frustrated because of the injustice regarding her uncle's murder, and her repeated attacks on Matt's conscience are meant to make him feel guilty about the fact that he could have used Daredevil to more easily solve problems like this. That's all well and good, except why is she coming to Hector's lawyer with all these problems? As far as she knows, he is just a blind, semi-capable lawyer who just met her uncle and did just about as good of a job as you would expect from a random lawyer. Why doesn't she cry to her mother about this stuff instead? Scenes like this would make more sense if you replace the niece with someone more familiar and who knows Matt's secret identity. Someone like Karen Page, maybe? But no, we can't have her around for some arbitrary reason. At least when she left in the comics, we still followed her story, but whatever. Then we get our first look at the costume of the B-villain, Muse. A more modern villain of the comics, because of course he is. Just gotta skip over Daredevil's decades-long history to do all the current stuff. But hey, at least he actually is from the comics, unlike most of these characters. But more on him later. In the meantime, we should discuss yet another goofy waste of screen time, as Matt's next client is a petty robber who stole some boxes of snacks. This guy is a repeat offender.
25 pages of offenses, drugs, trespassing, panhandling, petty larceny, not to mention the 4 separate cases where you failed to appear in court and they had to issue a bench warrant.
A liar.
I said I didn't do that shit.
I understand. The thing is, the bodega where this allegedly occurred has a surveillance system involving many cameras.
He is rude.
I get the friggin' blind dude.
And an idiot.
Could it have been a scroll?
Nope.
But regardless, Matt will negotiate things in order to make him only have to serve 10 days in jail, when he was expected to be there much longer. However, this guy is still pissed that he has to serve any time at all, because even though he did commit the crime, he claims to still be the victim, because the system is against him, and is always holding him back. And he only robbed the store because he wanted a little treat.
So why not get the caramel corn? I like that shit and it tastes good. And for that, they're willing to spend 5 times more to lock me up than they're willing to spend to feed me.
How about you feed yourself, you dick? You can avoid going to jail by getting a job and buying food normally like everyone else. And Matt will once again just sit there like a plank and apologize for not understanding this guy's struggle. And this whole segment eats up a ton of the episode, yet barely has anything to do with the overall story. And this guy is never seen again, with the only takeaway being that Matt now feels kinda bad for people in these situations. This is an obnoxious waste of time. So many cooler things could be happening right now, but aren't. If I weren't making a review of the show, I'd stop watching at this point, because this is annoyingly boring, and I have better things to do with 9 hours of my life than watch this show. But if that wasn't annoying enough, we now have to sit here alongside the Kingpin as he cringes at the silly little children's choir.
We built this city on rock and roll.
And then it happens again. This dude killed a man with a car door. What are we doing here? Why is this the story? Do today's writers have such little imagination that they can't think of anything better to do? Really? And it can't be overstated enough. These scenes take so long to get through. They go by so slowly, and there's so many of them. There are endless scenes of people yapping about nothing. These are hour-long episodes. Anyhow, along the way, it's revealed that BB used Daniel Blake to get information to slander Kingpin with. So Kingpin chews everyone out, but for some reason, he decides to reward the boy, in spite of his obvious incompetence.
I don't deserve this job.
I imagine this is how Disney hires its staff these days. Later, out of niece guilt, Matt wants to investigate Hector's murder, and he conveniently finds some very solid evidence in the form of a bullet casing that has a Punisher stamp on it. Naturally, Matt tracks down the Punisher and finds him in some random New York bunker, just kinda hanging out, doing who knows what. When questioned, Punisher denies responsibility for the murder and explains that there's a group of fanatic extremists out there that are trying to copy his style, but he denounces their movement. This somehow transitions into them crying with each other and opening up about their vulnerabilities.
Hear his voice. You do, don't you? Every time I start moving, I still hear my little boy.
Okay, I mean, this isn't the worst thing ever, but it sure is a far cry from their brilliant encounters in the past. This moment just feels really random, because we haven't seen these two interact in an extremely long time, and we are given hardly any time to get reacquainted with them before this meltdown. The reason Matt is crying is over Foggy's death, but the toll of Foggy's death hasn't really been prevalent until this point. The prior episodes made him seem like he was pretty okay and that he moved on, right up until this spontaneous outburst. Then this moment they have abruptly stops.
I ran him down. Oh, for Christ's sake. I did what I had to do. Now let the system take care of the rest.
And they go back to normal for a bit before Matt starts crying again and leaves. Then the Punisher is never seen again until the finale. So, you know how they plastered this guy all over the trailers and the marketing? Yeah, that was complete bullshit. Heaven forbid something exciting happen in this show. Later, the various couples chat about the same old shit we've been hearing for the last 4 episodes. And we close out with a reveal that Fisk has been secretly holding Vanessa's other lover in this dungeon room he has.
Let me out!
So that's pretty wizard. Episode 5 is an interesting one, and by interesting, I mean it has nothing to do with the rest of the season, and is pretty much complete filler. It's St. Paddy's Day, and that means these Irishmen will dress up like Skittles to go rob a bank. But uh-oh, Matt Murdoch is here, so shenanigans are afoot. Unfortunately, also in this bank is the father of Kamala Khan, aka Miss Marvel, and his presence will single-handedly alter the show's tone, as he drudges out that horrendous MCU humor along with him.
A custom-designed Funko in her honor. Oh yeah, well, you can't see. But it's her.
Is that right?
Oh yeah.
To make matters worse, he is a key player in this episode, so we have to deal with him a lot, as the bank robbers want him to open the vault, while Matt does a terrible job at hiding his identity yet again.
Mr. Murdoch, what are you doing? Exactly what kind of a lawyer are you?
A really good one.
How the hell did you get up here?
You're asking the wrong question. We're running out of time. You need to be thinking about your next move.
Hands up, both of you! No!
No.
Like, he knocks this guy out before he can squeal, but surely this guy will get up at some point, and surely he will talk to his bosses again at some point, and now he knows perfectly well what Matt Murdoch is capable of, and this is why costumes are important, and why the need to change into them at a moment's notice is important. The effort he used to go to keep his secret used to be one of the best aspects of the old show, and it was very entertaining to see all the clever ways he could continue to be Daredevil while keeping himself hidden. But here he is perfectly fine with exposing himself to Daddy Khan and the Skittle Squad, when in the past he would sooner die than tell Foggy. The leader of these robbers is a guy named Devlin. He was seen for 15 seconds in that earlier truck robbery, so his reemergence technically counts as continuity, and of course he has nothing to do with the comics, but the show will waste a lot of time on him regardless, as he has an aggressively long chat with this non-comic detective, in which they tell jokes.
Let's make this interesting.
You'll have exactly 3 minutes to think of a joke.
If you can make me laugh, I'll give you 3 more.
Ah, blimey, he says. I just fucked a penguin.
This is complete filler. Devlin is after this precious gem for some unknown reason, but Mad Murdoch just stops him, and that's the end of it. Devlin gets arrested, and is written out of the show alongside his unexplained precious gem, which Matt leaves in Mr. Khan's candy bowl, so I guess it wasn't all that important after all. Maybe, just maybe, this stuff is all a big setup for the next season's storyline, but as far as this season goes, this is just one big, burdensome, boring waste of time.